you ever heard a sound that perfectly mimicked a human, but later realized no human was there? Have you ever lived somewhere so quiet, so open, that you were certain you'd notice if something was watching you, only to discover you were wrong? Tonight's stories all share one thing in common: farms, open land, and something that was never supposed to be there. These are not urban legends. These are stories from people who lived where help was far away, and whatever they encountered didn't want to be seen.
A few years ago, my family moved onto a farm deep in the countryside. My stepmother had always dreamed of living off the land, growing our own food, raising animals, escaping city life completely. After several failed attempts, we finally found the perfect place, a quiet property with an old farmhouse and an established asparagus field. It felt peaceful, safe, exactly what we were looking for. We started small: chickens, ducks, a few rabbits. The ducks and chickens were allowed to roam freely, and for months everything felt normal. They explored the land, followed the creek, wandered near the tree line, and always came back. Until one morning, 2 of our adult ducks were gone. No feathers, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just gone. At first, we assumed they wandered off. Behind our property was a creek that connected to a larger state river. Animals could easily follow it without us noticing. But then something happened. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. As rain began to fall, my stepmom and I rushed outside to make sure all the animals were secured. That's when we heard it: a duck crying somewhere in the woods. We ran across the property, nearly an acre, toward the sound. My dad and brother followed behind us, both carrying guns just in case. We split up to search. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No insects, no wind, just the sound of rain and our footsteps. That's when we heard whistling, clear, sharp, repeated. We assumed it was my brother signaling us, so we moved toward it. Then suddenly, my dad and brother came running toward us from the opposite direction. They asked us why we were whistling. We weren't. None of us were. The sound had come from directly in front of us, close enough that we should have seen whoever made it. But there was nothing there. No movement, no footsteps, just silence. We left immediately. A week later, something even stranger happened.
I wasn't there for this part, but my brother and sister were. It was early evening during summer. The sky was darkening as a storm approached. They were standing near the house, watching the clouds turn gray. Then they saw him. About an acre away, near the tree line, a man crouching. He was dressed entirely in white. My brother yelled for him to leave. No response. After several warnings, my brother fired a warning shot into the air. That's when the man stood up and ran. Later, my sister admitted something she hadn't said at first. She noticed the man before he moved because he had a faint glow around him. After that, our parents forbade us from entering the woods. We never heard that duck again. And the 2 ducks that disappeared were never found. But even now, there's one question that still won't leave my mind. If my brother wasn't whistling, if none of us were doing it, then who was calling us from the woods? And here's the part that still gives me chills. The duck sound came from deep inside the forest, but the whistling sounded exactly like a human. Almost like something was trying to lure us closer, trying to see who would come first. Now we move on to our second story. This one is called The Mountain Farm in Georgia. Have you ever been somewhere so remote that if something went wrong, there would be no signal, no neighbors, and no one to hear you? I have.
It was a farm on top of a mountain in a country I knew almost nothing about. What I saw online was not what I arrived at, and the moment I realized this place wasn't safe, I also realized something else. Someone didn't want me there, and someone definitely didn't want me to leave.
5 years ago, when I was 26, I hit a breaking point. I had just finished college, deep in debt, unable to find work, depressed, and stuck in a small town in Washington. So I left. I began traveling through farm volunteering programs, working in exchange for food and shelter. For months, I moved from Washington to Oregon to California. Eventually, I saved enough money to go anywhere, so I chose, randomly. The country generator landed on Georgia. I knew almost nothing about it, which made it exciting. Only one farm replied to me. It was located on top of a mountain inside a national park. The photos showed a happy family, gardens, animals, warm dinners. Reality was very different. After nearly 20 hours of travel through broken roads and old buses, I arrived at a dirt path leading up a steep hill. The house looked abandoned, overgrown, dark, silent. A man greeted me, friendly, smiling, middle-aged. He said his family was away, but the house told another story. Broken furniture, mold, trash everywhere. That night, I heard something heavy dragging across the wooden floor. Slow, metallic. The next morning, while he left to get parts, I checked the listing again. The photos didn't match the house. That's when panic set in. As I packed my things, I saw 3 men walking toward the house. There was only one path. I ran into the forest. I hid. I heard them inside the house, looking for me. When I finally escaped, the farm listing vanished from the website days later. I trust my instincts. Something was very wrong.
I never went back to that mountain. A few days after I escaped, I checked the volunteering website again. The farm listing was gone, completely erased, like it had never existed. I tried searching for it online. Nothing. I never heard from Giddy again. Some people I've told this story to laugh it off. They say the men were probably just neighbors stopping by, that I panicked for no reason. But here's the thing. I've traveled alone. I've stayed in strange places. I've met difficult people. And I've never felt fear like that before. Because deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. Sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't what happened, but what almost did.
Story 3. The Cabin and the Crying Girl. When I was a child, I lived in a place so remote that silence felt heavy. There were no nearby neighbors, no streetlights, no traffic sounds at night. Just land. Endless open pasture surrounded our house, stretching so far that the horizon blurred into darkness when the sun went down. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt like the world stopped existing beyond our property line. And in the middle of that pasture, there was a cabin, an old one. It didn't belong to anyone anymore. No one slept there, no one used it for storage. It just stood there, weathered, leaning slightly to one side, its windows dark like empty eyes. As kids, we were told to stay away from it. No explanation, just rules. One night, when I was very young, my uncle told me why. He wasn't the kind of man who scared children for fun. He was calm, practical, and serious. That's why his words stayed with me. He told me the cabin once belonged to a farmer and his daughter. They lived alone, The farmer worked the land every day from sunrise to sunset. His daughter, only 6 years old, played nearby while he worked, always close enough for him to see her. Until one day, she wasn't. There had been an accident, a terrible one. The details were vague, but the ending was clear. The little girl died, and after that, the farmer abandoned the land. The cabin was left behind. When my uncle finished the story, the room was quiet. I remember staring at the floor, trying to convince myself it was just a sad story, nothing more.
Years passed. Life moved on. The cabin faded into the background until my older brother decided it was time to use it. My brother, Robert, was everything I wasn't. Strong, confident, fearless, the kind of person who laughed at ghost stories. One summer weekend, he invited a few friends over. They planned to clean up the cabin and camp there overnight. I remember watching them walk across the pasture as the sun began to set. They were laughing, carrying flashlights, food, sleeping bags. I wanted to warn them, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound stupid. The house felt unusually quiet that night. Too quiet. Hours passed. Everyone was asleep. Then, suddenly, I heard the front door open. Footsteps. Heavy breathing. Someone was crying. When I came out into the hallway, I saw them. My brother and his friends. Pale, sweating, shaking. Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years. I had never seen him cry before, not once. That night, he couldn't stop. Later, when he finally calmed down, he told us what happened. They had gone to sleep around midnight. The cabin was cold but quiet. No wind, no animals. Then, sometime in the early morning hours, Robert woke up. At first, he thought he was dreaming. He heard crying. Soft, broken, desperate. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a child. He lay still, listening, telling himself it was just coyotes in the distance. But the sound didn't fade. It got closer. Then he heard something else. A faint scream. Not loud, but full of pain.
Robert said the air in the cabin changed. It felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on his chest. He sat up in bed. That's when he saw her. At the foot of the bed, a little girl. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her face. Her body was covered in deep cuts and bruises, like she'd been dragged across the ground. She was crying. Not screaming, crying. The kind of crying that makes you feel sick because you know there's nothing you can do to help. Robert couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. He said she slowly lifted her head, but he couldn't see her face. It was wrong. Suddenly, the crying stopped, and that's what terrified him the most, because the silence felt intentional, like she was waiting. Robert jumped out of bed, grabbed his friends, and they ran. They didn't grab their bags. They didn't turn back. They ran across the pasture in the dark, convinced something was chasing them. They never went back to the cabin. The next morning, I told my brother the story my uncle had told me years before. He went silent. A few months later, the cabin burned down. No one knows how it started. Some people said it was lightning. Others said it was for the best. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I wonder if the girl was trapped there, or if she just wanted someone to acknowledge her pain. And sometimes, when I hear distant crying at night, I wonder, did she finally find peace, or is she still waiting for someone else to hear her? What do you think my brother saw that night? A ghost? A trauma memory? Or something tied to the land itself? And if you were in his place, would you have stayed long enough to see her face? Let me know in the comments. I read every one.
So now I want to know your opinion. How did this story make you feel? Did it actually scare you? Or did it leave you with that uncomfortable silence that follows real horror? If you enjoy true-style horror stories, stories that stay in your mind long after the video ends, then subscribe to this channel. New horror stories are coming, darker, deeper, and far more disturbing. And if you've ever experienced something you can't explain, share it in the comments. Your story might be the next one whispered here. Subscribe and listen carefully, because not every horror story is just a story.